As a child, without self-reflection, you are likely doomed to repeat the same mistakes. I was not aware of the opening cinematic to Diablo 2, which introduces the story, so when I got to Act 2, I was slightly confused that things were happening. I began writing about Diablo 2 right after finishing Diablo 1, based on rooted continuation of my thinking during that time. A lot of it, though, I feel is based on assumption and not truth in my interaction with Diablo 2, which still perplexes me. Diablo 2 is a game I have poured an incredible amount of time into, from roughly 2002 to 2008, in an almost dedicated fashion. But as I write this, after finishing through Diablo 2 in normal and nightmare difficulty to get my thoughts down, my relationship with Diablo 2 is not as clean as it is with Diablo 1. Diablo 1 still feels so pure, so believable in everything it provided, and how I have formed a relationship with it. Diablo 2 is different. I have difficulty classifying myself as a fan of something, especially when I compare myself to others online or otherwise. The amount of energy, life, time, and dedication people are able to sink into something feels scary sometimes. It's the opposite of infectious, it's repellent, but sometimes is a curiosity that I can't look away from. And when I think to the amount of time I put into Diablo 2, searching through everything, playing through the game multiple times, going through normal, nightmare, and sometimes hell difficulty time and time again with my chosen classes for those 6 years, I guess I can consider myself a fan of the game in the most basic sense in this day and age. I put my time in, I enjoyed what I got out of it, and continued wanting more. The replayability of the game was able to hook me. And why wouldn't it? It's an evolution of Diablo 1's core, expanded into so much more than I ever thought possible at the time. But I think the difficulty I still face with Diablo 2 is that while playing through it again, and re-experiencing everything with more educated eyes and testing my memory, is that I feel no nostalgia for the title. This is not the only example I have felt this feeling for either. For the summer of 2021, I made the arduous decision to move myself and everything I had to a completely different city and location, because my job and social life had become a mental and also physical hazard to my livelihood. All goodwill had dried up at that point as I took on the task of moving in a 2-week time period, barely able to keep it together mentally, except for the understanding that time does not wait for me. Once the high priority items were dealt with, I then spent the rest of the summer existing only for myself, and I traveled, seeing the sights across 10,000 kilometers and rekindling parts of my life I have not had the opportunity to re-experience in over a decade. It was a mixture of allowing myself to stop while always being on the move. Living in Canada, I took some extra time to rediscover Drumheller, Alberta specifically, widely recognized as the dinosaur capital of the world, which I had not been to personally since the year 2000, when I was 8, and visit the museum there. Now, heading there, I tried to remember what I experienced over 20 years ago, and what it was like, and what they had to show, and really came up empty in my memory. The main thing I know is that I went there during a family trip, and my grandma was also along. That's it. So this trip had a similar feeling to it, re-experiencing something but with no sentimental attachment to it. I was trying to put pieces together of what I might have gotten out of it, but that easily failed when I did not have a sense of what exhibits existed then, or how anything was organized. I could only guess that I was like some of the other families also attending the museum during that day, simply thinking, oh, it was cool to see some dinosaurs, and bored whenever the museum tried to discuss anything else. I realized something clearer that day, passing through the exhibit halls, that my experience was going to be very different in what I focused on, learned about, relearned about, and the general mood and tone of the presentation around me. Instead of dinosaurs being the key draw for people to come visit, it was the understanding the period of the dinosaurs was so small in the face of the constant changing of planet Earth. The overarching theme of the museum is death. Because in the science of the history of the Earth, scientists have organized eras and periods of time around when catastrophic extinction events have occurred. I felt disconnected compared to the other visitors. This was not a fun time full of wonder and amazement. This was a reflective time full of wonder and amazement. And I realized that I had changed. I still knew very little, and was learning as I went when experiencing Diablo 2 for the first time through that battle chest. It seems customary to bring up that thing, but it's still such a jewel of that time. I did not have the knowledge to understand how the Lord of Destruction expansion played into the rest of the game. I didn't know how expansion worked. So back in 2002, I played Diablo 2 twice to experience the game from beginning to end once. I played using regular Diablo 2 with its 3 discs, and then played it again using the Lord of Destruction disc, because I knew little at the time. When the Zodiac generally says that a Taurus is stubborn, I've accepted that. That did allow me to get familiar with the 2 classes I connected with. But even though I did this to myself, I've learned how to shape events to my benefit by being able to explore things even further, turning the time investment into something meaningful. It's experiential learning. My siblings and I each got 2 classes to fiddle with, and my father took the only class that made sense to him, the Paladin. It seemed like the easiest evolution to what he was already used to doing, while we were left to explore the more abstract classes, although that is arguable. Our conclusions of Warrior becoming the Paladin, Rogue becoming the Amazon, Sorcerer becoming the Sorceress seemed credible, but Necromancer, Barbarian, Assassin, and Druid could not slot in so easily. Maybe that's why I went for Necromancer and Barbarian, or Barbarian as I keep writing my thoughts down. I would not realize until over 15 years later that the Necromancer seemed to be the easiest character to play. But honestly, I love Bone Spear so much and not having to chase after enemies. So beginning to play Diablo 2 again, I had a few goals. Rediscover why I played it so much, what drew me in, why I continue to play it years later, and what continues to enthrall me. Diablo 2 is simplistic at its core. Go out into the fields and lands and mow down demons, fiends, and everything in between. How you do that is up to you, your class, and your combination of skills and equipment. It's quick to pick up, get dropped into the rogue encampment, and be on your way, and what I get out of Diablo 2 is the ability to attach a switch to my brain, and be able to turn it on and off depending on what I'm engaging in. The brain is off when fighting, clicking, selling equipment, and traveling. Unfortunately, a good majority of the game. And most of the gameplay loops. My brain is on when comparing items and realizing fighting is not going well and sometimes making an audible noise. It's a great de-escalating game at the end of the day, not allowing you to completely shut down. I went to rediscover the Barbarian and what I could do with it, and learn to love the speed that is possible, solving the chasing problem, and made traversal less of a burden. There was such a leap between the settings of Diablo 1 and 2, in that D2 felt so open. But gone was the encompassing horror deep underground of one location, changing as you descended further. Now it was a journey. The fields, deserts, plains, wastelands, forests, jungles, and towns were out there for you, and soaking it in the first time I remember it being something special. I enjoy journeys, even more so now than I did in the mid-2000s. Seeing a story go through its little adventures and how the characters of a story change from the beginning to end. Except that rarely happens within this game itself. I'll put a pin in that, come back to it later. But also something irks me as I look at the overall patterns that Diablo 2 follows in its construction of landscapes. The funneling of the player between 2 named locations, fences and small ridges at every turn walling you off from the outside world. This created an unconscious response of marking off the map and running around the perimeter until you saw the box it inevitably created. Act 3 breaks this somewhat with the forest and jungle, but I don't feel there was enough confidence in the design process to carry this forward, as Act 4 and 5 revert to the boxy nature of locations. This is not including all of the holes and underground entrances throughout the game, for passages, caves, and other creations to hark back to the descending nature of Diablo 1. However, these do not feel right to me in the grand scheme, as most will only have 2 levels, leading to optional treasure and more things to take care of. I did not feel similar to the experience of Diablo 1, discovering what lies beneath. I just felt like I was taking a shovel, occasionally digging my own holes just to see what it was like. But Diablo 2's locations gave an outstanding amount of scale to the world, and also created things to pick apart. The world of Sanctuary was born, and set the stage for so many stories to be told happening all over, and how different peoples and places existed. Recognizing this potential now, I miss the townsfolk of Tristram. Diablo 1's small scale allowed the opportunity to showcase relationships and some histories behind characters as your journey continued. There were characters greater than their roles of healer, weaponsmith, potion maker, and the like. Not all of them, but there was something to remember. Diablo 2's 4 towns do not do enough to establish the rogues, Luke Golain, Kurost, and Hrogoth to make something stand out. I argue Hrogoth does the best because the relations between the characters intertwine with the storyline, but Wariv and Mashif stand out because they are the characters who are not tied down to a single act, so they get to experience a little of the journey with you. The Pandemonium Fortress I can't count either because there is very few characters, little dialogue, and that the act was rushed to get finished in the first place. Also, you are constantly proving yourself as you go from location to location. The rogues don't like you, so here are targets that need to be taken care of. Can you really help Luke Golain? There's things in the sewers in the desert, and then within the palace itself that need clearing alongside your purpose there. The docks are the last line of defense against the enemies of the jungle. You're a one-man army, get to it. I don't believe you are a one-man army. Stop this siege single-handedly. I didn't realize it before, but when I say you mow down demons and fiends at the core of everything, I didn't think I would feel like an actual lawnmower doing it. Grass is replaced with metric tons of Hell's minions, being chopped and mulched by the bucketful. But that is great for replayability. I continued playing because there was always more to come back to. The limited enemies of Diablo 1 served its purpose to the structure and challenge of the game as a whole. And Diablo 2 threw that away in exchange for being able to go back and re-challenge things after you defeat them. You can fight Diablo, Baal, and, as fanatics of this game know, Mephisto again and again upon saving, quitting, and re-entering. Continuing to level your character to prepare for the next challenge was exactly what I did, especially before going to the next difficulty level. The step up to Nightmare and Hell difficulties were okay to manage, with bumps in the way coming from specific enemy types and unique enemies receiving additional buffs. Playing both Necromancer and Barbarian, it was awful running into an enemy that was immune to physical or magic damage, and losing experience when getting clobbered was a reminder to keep the brain on. But I so wanted those titles. Slayer, Champion, and then Patriarch. Although I liked the Sir title of the original game. Crafting and transmogrifying with the Heraldric Cube was novel for the time, and was great when it could be used beyond its main story purposes. Although, in any additions made to this game, they really needed to make it so that you could transmute more than one thing at a time. It became a clunky system when I have 3 of a gem or rune and want to make the next level, but wanting to do that multiple times. So many clicks. And runes and combining them into socketed items for special effects was wondrous to read about in the strategy guides, because I would never, ever, 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 ever see them in game, but those things become weary after a while. What's enthralling about this game for me now? What pulls me back? Maybe it is my impact with the world not being so clear and wonderful as I thought it was. The first 2 acts are the cleanest. You free the rogue monastery and cathedral and get them back on their feet. Luke Golain can reopen and rebuild. But as the game continues, those results are not as clean as you think they're going to be. You don't save much in Act 3. and it's left middling and astray. Kurast is not going to be revitalized because of what you've done, and it will never be what it was in its former glory. Harakath was saved, but in a very fleeting way. Our role as savior is not what is actually happening. We linger, we persist, we continue for another day, but other choices greater than us by other players hold more power. Will the rogues truly rebuild? Will Luke Golain thrive again? Not our problem, because we need to be on the move. We can't think about the long term too much, because there is so many short-term problems caused by desperate situations. Humanity barely holding on and sacrificing their strongest for as much time as possible. The imprisonment of Baal in Tal Rasha and Mephisto in Sankakur, burying powerful figures of the Horadrim and Zakarum, had long-standing consequences that infected everything around them. Act 3 truly shows that, as we maul down corrupted zealots and the very council in order to get at Mephisto, using pieces of yet another dead, powerful individual to get to him. In Act 5, we might have stopped the siege, but that was only the beginning, with the death of the elders before you get there, all except for Neelathok, who is a traitor, collapsing another body of order before the very World Stone gets corrupted and needs to be destroyed by Tyrael. Diablo 2 is less of a game about being the hero and saving the day, and more of struggling to do whatever you can, whatever the risk. And sometimes you will experience a tremendous victory, but it will always be fleeting as the grand scheme continues, pulling you along. I sometimes wonder what Tyrael means with the final portal he opens, giving us rest after all our deeds. Like, we have done so much over the course of the adventure that he realizes we are on our last legs and puts us out to pasture. Although, throughout the entire story, very few characters really change. Let's bring that pin back. Diablo has a time making characters that grow or change throughout the course of the game. If they do, they're usually told off-screen. That is the case of the Wanderer, being the hero from Diablo 1, who did very little changing except for at the very end. Diablo 2's hero receives less, but outside characters seem to receive more. Marius is one of my favorite video game characters. He makes me remember that living in the worlds of video games really suck, and that I should appreciate the world that I live in. All Marius is trying to do is continue living his life after horrific events of the monastery plague his mind. His is a state of existing, although the series of unfortunate events continues, with the Wanderer causing destruction he once more witnesses. And in that moment, what is your life, really? Continuing to live. And from then on, our old hero, now harbinger of the return of evil, now has a buddy who is entirely ordinary. Of all the players in Diablo's story, Marius is the only relatable one to me, because he is ordinary. No abilities, no advanced training, no divine destiny. Marius is simply a resident of Sanctuary and what transpires, which is grounded and also tragic because of where it brings him. Marius apparently bears the title of the Unnoticed or Unnoticeable, which I find poignant, given his effect on events in the story. The power of man to tip the balance by such small actions, such as being compelled to pull a stone from the body of Tal Rasha, leading to Baal's return, and Tyrael unable to stop it because, hey, this simple man is not going to cause any trouble, right? I've got the Wanderer to deal with. But Marius possesses tremendous strength in the position he's in. I'm still fascinated in his ability to go it alone and reach the bowels of the Durance of Hate to witness the brother's ceremony. God, what an adventure to be able to make it there. Unnoticeable indeed. And this is where the tragedy lies. Marius having this strength, but only human, this is as far as he gets. Unable to step through to reach the Hellforge, where I expect him to have been killed anyway, instead crumbling from what he has seen, experienced, and continues to experience in his mind, he meets his sad end by the one whom he freed. As an addendum to this, I can never not watch the cinematics for this game. Even over 20 years later, they are supremely well done. The presentation, cinematography of certain shots, the emotion that is carried through facial expressions. There were few other games at the time that delivered this level of quality that were not live action. It elevated Marius for me, and also presented the true moment of impact and visual terror I will never unsee. Skip here if you do not want the imagery. This is your warning. Okay, go. Marius witnesses the brother ceremony, which leads to the final death of Diablo 1's hero in a highly graphic way. It was true that we already saw terrible things inflicted in previous cinematics, including harsh physical changes, but they were not up close and personal. Imagine just how many hours and how much effort the animators had to put into visualizing a human head looking like it was melting from the inside out, blood squirting, and pain so great that it cannot be emphasized any harder as humanity is replaced and demon takes over. Like, the battle the hero was having to contain Diablo had been lost for some time now, and this was just the final blow to completely eliminate him. And to be honest, having now seen how the cinematics look in Diablo 2 Resurrected, a lot of that emotion and pain on the characters' faces hits less. There's less desperation and fear in the mannerisms in some scenes, but it also helps me remember what Diablo 2 still is, and that is a game that belongs to everyone. When Diablo 3 came out, I got the collector's edition, which came with a Diablo head bust with a Soulstone USB stick. It's really nice, and on the USB stick is a copy of Diablo 2, able to be installed on any computer anytime you want, as long as you have the CD key to go with it. It feels now like the last form of goodwill passed down by Blizzard, saying, "Here, have fun with our game." But on top of that, you can easily download Diablo 2 from so many places, and with whatever patch version you want if you like to have different mods and extra fan-created content attached to enhance your experience. No amount of online features or ladder play from Blizzard can replace what fans of the series have already done to allow for Diablo 2 to continue living on for over 20 years. Diablo 2 is a game that belongs to its people, and there is nothing that can take that away, no matter how hard someone tries. But Diablo 2 was not alone throughout the years leading up to Diablo 3. Other action RPGs would enter the fray, and there is still, specifically, one that entered my home that helped tide us over, bringing the setting closer to home.